Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Happy listening. Ponniyin Selvan, Fresh Floods, Kalki. Translated by Pavitra Srinivasan. Chapter 6. A Meeting at Midnight. A royal banquet was on the agenda once the Kuruvai Kuthu and Devaralan's frantic dance came to an end. The Sambuvarayar clan well nigh outdid itself. Vandiyadevan, sitting down to the feast, found that the food turned to ashes in his mouth. None of the dishes spread out for the guests' edification delighted him. His body was exhausted. He felt a mixture of worry, confusion, and a vague disquiet that he was hard put to explain. Still, he could hardly ignore his friend and listened with a very creditable assumption of enthusiasm as Kandamaran, who, brimming with justifiable pride at the honored guests, listed every single one of them. Aside from Parvetarayar and host Sambuvarayar, there was Maravarayar, known by his proud title of Marapadi Tinnavan. Mummudi Palavarayar was present as well. Kandamaran took care to whisper about other renowned guests in Vandiyadevan's ears and point them out subtly. Tantungi Kalingarayar, Vanangamudi Munayarayar, Devasenapati Puvarayar, Anjada Singam or the lion-hearted Muttarayar, Rettai Kudai Rajaliyar, and even the Kolli Malai Peru Nila Velar, amongst others. None of these men could be termed ordinary in any sense of the word. It was no easy task to gather them under one roof either. All were rulers of their own dominions, large or small as the case may be, or had earned the status of kingship through their valorous deeds and service to the country. The word Raja or Arasar had, by continuous usage, morphed into Arayar. It was the norm in those days to refer to the chiefs of important clans or those equal to such chiefs in stature by that prestigious title, a nod to their ruling capabilities. Sometimes Arayar was added to their respective seats as well. In truth, these warriors were treated more as kings themselves rather than chieftains or feudal lords. Not for nothing were they awarded such privileges. Princes and kings born in royal families, lounging in luxury and enjoying every comfort, were not the only ones to be addressed with respect. Their titles would serve no meaning if they could not defend themselves or their people. The men assembled in Sambuvarayar's palace were all warriors of repute, sporting numerous scars on their battle-hardened bodies as evidence of distinguished war service. Each had proven himself time and again as capable of guarding his fort and country with his life, if necessary. All had pledged their unconditional support and submission to Padayare's cities Sundara Chorar, ruling their territories under his suzerainty. Some occupied positions of great authority in the empire as well and carried out their respective duties in administrative or other capacities. By rights, Vandiyadevan's heart ought to have been leaping with wild joy at the sight of such august personages at the same banquet, but he felt not the slightest enthusiasm. Why are so many of these kings gathered here? He wondered more than once. Why now? Vague suspicions and conjectures cropped up in his mind, confounding him. The sense of disquiet had not abated by the time he finished his meal and retired to the isolated space Kandamaran had showed him to for the night. Sambuvarayar's royal palace was swarmed with esteemed guests. It meant that Vandiyadevan was allotted a mere mandapam in one of the upper balconies open to the elements. Sleep well, you must be exhausted. I'll join you here once I've seen other guests to their rooms, Kandamaran assured him before leaving. Drowsiness assailed Vandiyadevan the moment he set his head on the floor. Nitra Devi swept him into her arms almost at once. And yet, not even the goddess of sleep can exercise much control over the mind. The body might be at rest, the eyes closed in repose, but thoughts that crawl in the subconscious choose these moments to reveal themselves. Dreams rise, shaking off the suppression of a conscious mind, looping unconnected thoughts, fears, and experiences to form surprisingly disturbing pictures. Far away, in the distance, a jackal began to bay. One multiplied into 10, 100, and 1,000, raising their voices in a howl that made his skin prickle in terror. And that was not all. They were approaching him step by excruciating step. In the deep, stifling dark, their little eyes smoldered in their faces like bright red embers of burning coal. There was only one way of escape. Vandiyadevan turned in the opposite direction and stopped abruptly. 1,000 shrieking hounds accosted him, their sharp teeth practically dripping with the urge to tear him apart. Their eyes gleamed, spitting sparks of fury in the pitch blackness. Vandiyadevan shuddered, barely able to string a thought together as he contemplated his terrible fate, caught between slavering hounds on one side and a pack of jackals on the other. But then, oh thank God, there appeared a temple almost in front of him. Vandiyadevan shook off his terror, practically flew into it, and locked the doors behind him. When he turned to finally take in his surroundings, he found that his refuge was a Kali temple. The fierce goddess seemed to be at her terrifying best, teeth descending in fangs, tongue hanging out in bloodthirsty fashion. Before Vandiyadevan could do little more than gape at the statue, a priest danced out from behind it. He gripped a fearsome scythe in his hand. So, finally arrived, have you? Come here. And he sidled closer, closer, closer to our young man. You are a prince, are you not? Recite your family history, he demanded. How long did your ancestors rule? The truth, now. The Vallavarayars of the Vanar clan ruled for 300 years, Vandiyadevan stammered. We lost our kingdom because of the Vaitumbarayars in my father's time. You are not a sacrifice worthy of the goddess, roared the priest. Leave. Abruptly, Kali's form changed into that of Krishna. A couple of young women danced around the idol, garlands in their hands, and Andal's melodious pasurams on their lips. Vandiyadevan almost smiled, mesmerized at this appealing performance, when he heard someone else singing behind him. Kandom, Kandom, Kandom. He turned and saw Alvalkadiyan Nambi. No, not the man, but just his head, stuck on the temple's Bali Peedam. Unable to stomach this truly hideous scene, Vandiyadevan turned abruptly and struck his head on a pillar. The misty wreaths of dreamscape dissolved, but he happened to see something else that seemed to bind the terrible strands of a nightmare with reality. The Kadambur fort wall circled the palace at a little distance, and a head was stuck on it, directly opposite the balcony Vandiyadevan lay in. And yes, it happened to belong to Alvalkadiyan. This time, though, Vandiyadevan was sure that the sight was neither a nightmare nor the product of an overactive imagination. No matter how many times he blinked or shook himself, the head remained in place. It was equally obvious that this time said head was attached to a stout body. Nambi's fingers clutched the edges of the wall in a death grip. His eyes were focused downwards, observing something below him. What on earth was he watching? Face furrowed with concentration? Something was terribly wrong here. Alvalkadiyan could not have arrived out of the goodness of his heart. He had some nefarious intention tucked away, some evil plan in mind. Vandiyadevan was sure. And wasn't it his duty, as Kandamaran's dearest friend, to save Kadambur from harm? What kind of a man was he to loll about in bed when the people who had offered him such a magnificent feast were about to be wounded? Vandiyadevan sprang up, tucked his sheathed sword into his waistband, and began walking towards where he had seen Alvalkadiyan's head. His makeshift bed had been in a corner of an upper balcony, well away from passages in use. Vandiyadevan had to pass through, skirt around, and walk by many great corridors, pillars, and the top of mandapams, benches, and stubams to find his way to the fort wall. He had been walking for a while along one such eternally meandering passage when he heard voices. Vandiyadevan paused. He tiptoed towards a pillar, concealed himself behind it, leaned forward, and gazed down. Below him lay a narrow courtyard, enclosed on three sides by towering walls. 10 or 12 men were seated within. The fort wall, rising high, failed to let in the half moon's pearly rays, but a strategically placed iron lamp managed to shed some light. The courtyard's occupants were none other than Kadambur's esteemed guests. Vandiyadevan had seen these men, kings, lords, and officials of the empire, at the banquet barely hours ago. Obviously, they had foregathered this late to discuss matters of great importance. Alvarkadiyan was probably doing his best to eavesdrop on their conversation. His position was strategically advantageous. The fort and the palace walls met in such a way that he could see the gathering below and listen to their speech, but the reverse was not true. Ah, Alvarkadiyan was clever indeed, no doubt about it. But he had reckoned without the Prince of Vallam, the valiant Vandiyadevan. No one could palm their clever tricks off him, least of all this stout scoundrel. He would catch the wily Nambi by the scruff of his neck, stop him from spying on people, march him straight to his hosts, and— But how? He would have to jump into the courtyard and walk across it to get to Alvarkadiyan, and he could hardly do so without attracting the attention of the warriors gathered. God knew there were dangers enough in attempting that. Sambhuvarayar's morose words, "I see no reason for your friend's arrival today," echoed in his ears. These men, these pillars that upheld Choranadu in every way, were keen on discussing gravely important matters of state. That they wished to do so in secret was obvious from their location. His sudden arrival in their midst would rouse all their worst suspicions. It would be impossible to explain his real motives. Alvarkadiyan would be long gone by then. He, Vandiyadevan, would be chastised as the spy, the one to suffer the ignominy of an interrogation. And in truth, what possible answer could he give should they ask him about his nocturnal wanderings? There would be only one possible outcome. Kandamaran would be put to the blush. Ah, there he was, seated at the periphery of the crowd. He too seemed to be a part of this discussion. No matter, Vandiyadevan would ask him all about it in the morning. His attention wandered at that moment to a closed palanquin that sat towards one side. Ah, wasn't this the one that had followed Paruvetarayar on his way to Kadambur? The lady within, the one who had pulled aside the screen with her silken golden hands, where was she in this sprawling palace? Hadn't Kandamaran mentioned that the old man didn't even dare leave her in the Antapuram? Ah, such was the case when men married so late in life, and it was 1,000 times worse when the bride happened to be ravishingly beautiful. Men such as Paruvetarayar were reduced to the pathetic state of dragging their wives along wherever they went. So tortured were they by wild suspicion and doubts. Now here was this grand old warrior, reduced to the disgrace of being hopelessly infatuated by a pretty young woman. He was little better than a slave to her beauty. And she was no Rati, Menakai, or the celestial Rambai at any rate. Vandiyadevan hadn't forgotten his revulsion when he had caught sight of her. God knew what the great Paruvetarayar saw in this supposed beauty. Even worse was Alvarkadiyan's fascination with her. Why else would he eavesdrop so desperately on this gathering if not for the palanquin's presence? But then, who knew what their relationship was to each other? Perhaps they were siblings or lovers? Had Paruvetarayar perhaps taken her by force? He was certainly capable of such cavalier treatment. If so, that would explain Alvarkadiyan's preoccupation with the lady. Possibly he was seeking an opportunity to speak with her. Ah, what did any of this matter? Sleep beckoned. There was nothing to be gained by poking his nose into affairs that did not concern him. Just as the young man decided that his bed looked more inviting by the moment, a stray word from the conversation below reached him. Someone had mentioned his name. Vandiyadevan paused and listened to the speech with all his ears. The young man who arrived today, claiming to be your son's friend, where has he been quartered? It is of utmost importance that not a whisper of our conversation tonight reaches him. Remember, his master is the Martanda Nayakar of the Northern Chora forces. The last thing we need is for word of our plans to leak. Should any of us suspect that boy of the slightest knowledge of our meeting, make sure that he does not leave this fort. In fact, it would be better if he is silenced once and for all. Our readers may well imagine Vandiyadevan's sentiments upon this speech. He decided then and there that he was going nowhere and settled down to listen to the rest. Aditya Karikalar happened to be the commander-in-chief of the Northern Chora forces, the firstborn of King Sundara Chorar and heir apparent to the empire. What was their objection to Vandiyadevan serving under him? And what were they discussing that the crown prince could not know of at any cost? Vandiyadevan is fast asleep in a balcony above stairs. Kandamaran's voice floated up to him, defending his friend. Not a word of our conversation is bound to reach him. He isn't the kind that pokes his nose into business that doesn't concern him anyway. Even if he should get wind of our meeting somehow, I'll make sure that he doesn't prove a hindrance to your plans. You may rest easy, he is my responsibility. Such faith in your friend, Kandamara! Touching indeed. For your sake, I am glad of it. We know nothing of him after all. These warnings are necessary. We are about to speak on a supremely confidential subject, one that will decide the fate of this very empire. Our purpose in gathering here is to discuss the succession to the Chora throne. Remember, the slightest whisper of our meeting would end in disastrous consequences for all of us. Warned Parvetarayar. End of chapter. Hidden meanings and explanation. Balipidam. A slab of rounded stone, sometimes carved around the sides and placed in front of the sanctum sanctorum of the temple. Originally intended for sacrifices in times long gone, the practice was discontinued. These days it is used more for offerings or rice. The end. I hope you guys enjoyed listening. Please like, share, and do subscribe if you wish to listen to more chapters and the next volumes as well. And please comment your thoughts. Thank you.